Jumping is such a simple mechanic. You press one button, whether that is the spacebar, A on Xbox or X on PlayStation, they all serve the same purpose. It's an action that we perform without even thinking about it, because it's become so natural for us to do. It can be used to either traverse vertically or even horizontally. It can be used to gain momentum and improve movement speed, to dodge enemies and obstacles, or aid a player in exploring the world. Jumping and movement is a lot more important than a lot of people think. It's a mechanic that has been improved upon countless times, and developers are still finding new ways of improving on such a basic fundamental of gaming. It's such a basic mechanic, yet it's a significant part of a lot of games, and has been since its first introduction. It's been responsible for introducing a lot of movement mechanics that are now in FPS games, and was something that made platformers so addictive and fun to play. It's what made games like Super Mario, Castlevania and Prince of Persia so fun for me to play. It was almost like playing an instrument to a certain degree, finding the right rhythm with each jump and slowly mastering the timing, especially in Super Mario. But jumping in video games has a long history, so let's jump into the very beginning of it. Jumping was first introduced back in 1975 in an Atari game called Steeplechase, which was a horse racing game where you had to jump over obstacles. A very simple yet addictive implementation. Although that doesn't seem all that impressive now, back then it was seen as a big deal that would allow games to evolve. And that was really the only jump mechanic we saw until Donkey Kong in 1981. Jumps in Donkey Kong were primarily used for dodging and were always the same height and length. In 1985, Dragon Buster introduced the first ever double jump, which was the first time the standard jump was improved upon. Not only that, but the player was also able to now attack enemies whilst jumping. Jump wasn't only used for moving and dodging, but was now also used for combat. The next game is probably the most popular game ever, and everyone has played it at one point in their life. It also probably has the most satisfying and rewarding jump in all of gaming. That game is Super Mario Bros, which came out in 1985. In Super Mario Bros, you had the freedom of choosing how long and high you wanted to jump. Jump wasn't only used vertically, but with a longer jump you could also move horizontally. The jump was also used offensively and defensively. Not only that, but you also had access to springboards, which let you do a high jump when timed correctly. The springboard had to be fully compressed before pressing the jump button in order for this to work. So the basic jump mechanic we saw back in 1975 had already developed quite a bit in the space of 10 years, and it carried on doing so. Games like Sonic the Hedgehog and most platformers were using the jump mechanics. But you might be thinking, why is jump actually the most important mechanic? Well, because it impacts so many other gameplay aspects of the game, and the biggest one is movement. Now, movement has become a major gameplay feature, especially in modern FPS games. Call of Duty has focused on movement ever since Advanced Warfare with its exosuits, which allowed for various different jumps and boosts that helps you move around the map quicker and be a harder target to hit. Or games like Apex Legends, where the jump can be used in many different ways, but it's somewhat difficult to learn. I'll talk about some of these later on, but first let's go back to the first FPS game that utilised the jump mechanic to improve movement. The original Quake that released in 1996 and became a pioneer for many arena and multiplayer games down the line. Quake had 3 different movement mechanics that the player could utilise to their advantage. One was called zigzagging, which was basically a rapid alternation of the strafe keys whilst running, which increases your speed. Then wall running, and then bunny hopping or strafe jumping, which we'll be talking about. Bunny hopping was increased to increase player movement speed. Players realised that strafing increased their movement speed, but there was no way to maintain that speed or even increase it whilst on the ground, and that's where the jump comes in. Jumping and strafing whilst in the air increased the player's speed, so as soon as you hit the ground you'd jump again and begin chaining jumps that would lead to bunny hopping. Players also discovered that you could use rockets. Shooting rockets off the wall gave you an instant increase in speed, so using a rocket to accelerate yourself and then maintaining and even increasing that speed through bunny hopping was an excellent method of moving quicker around the map. Quake was the first FPS game to introduce such advanced movement mechanics, and not only did they make movement better and addictive, but it also increased the skill gap. And bunny hopping became addictive. People would spend hours on end perfecting the mechanic and trying to go quicker, and in a sense it can be said that it encouraged the idea of speedrunning games. However, the developers didn't actually mean for this to be a thing, as they actually tried to remove the mechanic in future games. Bunny hopping carried over to many more FPS games through the years. Half-Life, which then carried over to Counter-Strike and Counter-Strike Source, where players in the esports scene were using bunny hopping to their advantage. And although bunny hopping isn't as bad as it was back then, it's still in Counter-Strike now, just nowhere near to the same extent. But I couldn't talk about jumping and movement in FPS games without mentioning probably the best and most advanced movement mechanics in any game: Titanfall and Titanfall 2. Titanfall introduced a really in-depth movement mechanic: the double jump, the wall run, the bunny hop and the slide. You could chain all of these together to achieve improved speed and maintain speed throughout. Titanfall 2 improved on some of these mechanics, and jumping was yet again used to maintain speed while strafing, the same way it was used in the original Quake game. Wall running also offered a speed boost if you jumped off towards the end of a wall run. Titanfall 2 really became the ultimate movement shooter, and mastering the mechanics really paid off. Unfortunately, it wasn't a major success, just like the first game. Then came along Apex Legends, which was somewhat of a reskin of Titanfall 2, but as a battle royale game with different playable heroes. However, it borrowed the same weapons and a lot of the same movement mechanics, apart from of course wall running and the double jump. But it still had a lot of the same movement mechanics, but they behaved slightly different. You have the wall jump, the skip jump and many others that many players have mastered. In a game like Apex, it's added an extra layer of skill. And as of right now, I'd probably say Apex has some of the best movement in any FPS game out there. It really separates the better player from the average player. All these different movement mechanics are available because of the jump. The evolution of such a simple mechanic that has shaped many games and changed the way many FPS games are played is why I think it's one of the most important mechanics in gaming. It's a great way to add a higher skill gaps in games, and I find it to be a very addictive mechanic. Every FPS game I play, I find myself using the jump button even when I don't need to, but I find it even more addictive in games like Titanfall and Apex, where you actually benefit from mastering the movement mechanics. Another reason why it's important for movement is because it helps a lot of games maintain speed, which movement is all about. We saw that be the case in Quake and Titanfall, but also it was the case in games like Half-Life and Half-Life 2, and of course the early Counter-Strike games. But even after all these years and all these different implementations of the jump, I still think the best feeling jump is in the original Super Mario Bros. A simple jump, yet for me the most satisfying. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.